The bullhorn blared at dawn. Condemned property. Vacate in 24 hours. My worker's home, ordered destroyed by our HOA president. I stood barefoot in the gravel, watching Diane wave a fake violation notice, smiling like she'd already won this war. I'm Marcus Webb, third-generation strawberry farmer in Ventura County, running 40 acres and housing 12 seasonal workers on site. Diane Ashford moved into Hillcrest Ranch Estates 2 years ago, buying the biggest lot, appointing herself HOA president unopposed. She hated my bunkhouse instantly, calling it an eyesore that lowered property values for everyone surrounding my working farm. I explained the bunkhouse predated the HOA by decades, grandfathered under county agricultural zoning, fully inspected every single year. Diane didn't care about facts, she wanted control, and my land was the one thing she couldn't touch yet. Last spring she mailed me a fine for unauthorized structures, ignoring the grandfather clause, demanding $4,000 immediately. I refused to pay, forwarding county zoning documents proving the bunkhouse's legality since 1987, decades before her subdivision existed. Diane's response was a handwritten note. Rules are rules, Mr. Webb. Even for people like you. People like me. I didn't know yet what she meant, but the venom in her handwriting was unmistakable. 2 nights later, someone cut my bunkhouse's water line, leaving 8 workers without running water in 90-degree heat. I filed a police report. The officer shrugged, said HOA disputes weren't criminal, and suggested mediation with the board. Diane sat across the mediation table, folder open, insisting my workers were trespassing on shared community drainage easements. My foreman Rosa translated for the crew, who looked terrified, some without full documentation, afraid of any attention. Diane noticed their fear and smiled slightly, like she'd found a lever she could pull whenever she wanted. Maybe immigration should know about your little labor camp, she said sweetly, sipping her iced tea, watching my face. My stomach dropped. This wasn't about property values anymore. It was about power over vulnerable, frightened people. That night Rosa told me 2 workers wanted to leave, scared Diane would call authorities and destroy their lives. I promised protection I wasn't sure I could deliver, knowing one phone call could unravel everything I'd built. The next HOA newsletter labeled my farm a blight, urging neighbors to pressure the county for immediate condemnation. Neighbors I'd known for years started avoiding eye contact, whispering as I passed the mailboxes each morning. Diane organized a walking tour of my property line, photographing the bunkhouse from every angle for her file. I caught her trespassing on my actual land, camera raised, and asked her to leave. She refused, laughing. This is a shared easement, she insisted, standing on a survey marker that clearly sat inside my fence line. I hired a surveyor to prove the boundary. Diane called it harassment and filed a restraining order against me. The judge dismissed her request in 11 minutes, but the damage to my reputation in Hillcrest was already done. Someone slashed my truck tires in the HOA parking lot. Security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned that exact hour. I started recording every interaction with Diane, sensing I'd need evidence long before I understood how much. My daughter Emma, 12, asked why the neighborhood kids suddenly stopped inviting her to birthday parties that month. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. Diane went quiet, and I let myself believe the worst had passed. The workers relaxed, planting new tomatoes behind the bunkhouse, laughing again over dinner under the string lights. Rosa said maybe Diane had finally accepted the county's ruling and moved on to another neighborhood crusade. I should have known better. Silence from Diane Ashford was never peace. It was only her reloading. Diane requested an emergency HOA meeting, packing the room with residents she'd personally recruited over cocktail hours. She unveiled a safety report, claiming my bunkhouse violated fire codes, citing photos I recognized instantly as doctored. I stood and pointed out the timestamp errors, but Diane's crowd booed, unwilling to hear any defense at all. The board voted to petition the county for condemnation, citing unanimous community concern that wasn't remotely unanimous. I later learned Diane had threatened 2 board members with fines over unrelated fence issues to secure their votes. A county inspector arrived unannounced, apologetic, saying an anonymous tip claimed workers lived in inhumane conditions. He toured the bunkhouse, found clean bathrooms, working stoves, smoke detectors, everything code required, and then some. Diane arrived mid-inspection, visibly furious the inspector wasn't finding what her anonymous tip had promised him. Check the electrical panel again, she pushed, and I realized she'd studied my property harder than I'd studied hers. The inspector found nothing wrong, but warned me Diane could keep filing complaints indefinitely, draining my time and money. That night I discovered my mailbox stuffed with anonymous flyers calling my farm an IC magnet and a disgrace. Rosa's brother, staying temporarily, packed his bags that night, terrified the flyers would bring real agents to our door. I begged him to stay, promising a lawyer, but fear is louder than promises when your life is at stake. Diane's own gardener, Miguel, quietly told Rosa his boss had been photographing our workers' faces for weeks. Miguel said Diane kept a folder labeled leverage, full of names, photos, and license plates from my property. That word leverage chilled me. This was never really about zoning. Diane was building a weapon. I hired attorney Priya Nair, who'd handled agricultural labor cases before and recognized Diane's pattern immediately. She's not the first HOA president to weaponize immigration fear, Priya said. But she picked the wrong farm this time. Priya subpoenaed HOA financial records, curious why Diane fought so hard over one legally grandfathered structure. The records revealed something startling. Diane had been billing the HOA for consulting fees nobody had ever approved. $40,000, funneled through her husband's shell company, disguised as landscaping and security contracts. My bunkhouse crusade, it turned out, was cover, a distraction so nobody would scrutinize the HOA's shrinking bank balance. Priya suggested we present everything at once, the fraud, the doctored photos, and the illegal surveillance folder. Diane, sensing something, scheduled a final emergency vote to condemn my bunkhouse before anyone could stop her. The meeting was set for the following Thursday, in the clubhouse, with county officials personally invited by Diane. I barely slept that week, rehearsing every document, terrified one misstep would cost my workers their home. Rosa gathered the crew, translating every plan twice, making sure no one felt like a pawn again. Thursday arrived. The clubhouse overflowed, Diane at the podium, gavel ready, confidence dripping from every gesture. She opened with photos of my unsafe bunkhouse, projected huge on the screen behind her, timestamps freshly altered. Priya stood calmly, asked to project her own evidence, and the room fell into an uneasy hush. The screen showed Diane's leverage folder, photographed faces, license plates, addresses, labeled with cruel little notes. Gasps rippled through neighbors who'd never imagined their calm, composed president tracking farm workers like criminals. Next came the financial records, $40,000 in fake consulting fees routed to her husband's account. Diane's face drained of color as her own treasurer, blindsided, demanded she explain the discrepancy immediately. "This is a smear campaign," she stammered, but the numbers glowing on screen didn't care about her tone. The county inspector, present as her invited guest, quietly confirmed her earlier safety report. Photos were doctored. One board member she'd bullied into voting yes finally spoke up, admitting Diane had threatened his own fence permit. Neighbors who'd whispered against me for months now turned their chairs away from Diane entirely. Diane's own husband, blindsided too, quietly slid his resignation letter across the table without saying a single word. I stood, voice steady, and simply said, "My bunkhouse follows the law. Her presidency clearly hasn't." The room erupted into arguing. Someone called for immediate impeachment. Another shouted for the sheriff to be called. Diane grabbed her folder and ran for the exit, but a deputy already waiting outside stopped her cold. She was escorted out in handcuffs for embezzlement, her perfectly composed mask finally completely shattered. The board voted unanimously that same night to drop all condemnation proceedings against my grandfathered bunkhouse permanently. Rosa's brother unpacked his bags, and the whole crew celebrated with tamales under the string lights again. Diane pled guilty to fraud months later. Meanwhile, my strawberries kept growing, and my workers finally slept without any fear.